Hello, everyone. Welcome. I would like to make a special welcome to Mayor Mauro and his staff, who's done an amazing job hosting us here in the city. I also would like to give a welcome to the civil and military authorities that are here. Thank you, grazie. And also university president, professionals and professors, and the Tur Heyerdahl family and scholarship committee members, and of course, friends and supporters of the Tur Heyerdahl Institute. We couldn't be more honored today to have you all here in this location. We would also like to welcome all of the people that are watching us online. The streaming technology is a huge plus because we reach a lot of corners of the world in this way. Buongiorno e benvenuti da Andora, Italia. I've been told that that means good morning and welcome to Andorra, Italy. I hope that was correct. My name is Bettina Hoff-Hermansen, and I am the Director for International Student and Scholar Services at a university in Minnesota called Augsburg University. The university was founded by Norwegian immigrants about 154 years ago. I also direct the Norway Hub, which is our way to link our heritage back to Norway. I grew up in Tønsberg, Norway, which is just about 40 minutes from Larvik, which is where Tur Heyerdahl was born. And so I have a big connection to that area of the country as well. So, of course, it is a pleasure to stand before you today as we celebrate the 2023 annual Tur Heyerdahl International Day on Migration and Climate Change. And especially wonderful that we are in Italy, where Tur Heyerdahl has deep and had deep connections and lived for a large part of his life, a total of 25 years. Before we begin, I would like to just mention a few things about Tur Heyerdahl and this annual International Day. Some of this information is well known to most of you, but will be new to others. And I think that great things are worth naming more than once. The Tur Heyerdahl International Day is inspired by UNESCO's World Science Day for Peace and Development. And one of the reasons for that is, of course, that UNESCO does a lot of great work, but also the fact that Tur Heyerdahl has a part of his work is in the archives, in the UNESCO archives. So Tur Heyerdahl, he was a world citizen, he is an explorer, he was a writer, a scientist, and the Tur Heyerdahl's legacy is an archive of this unusual richness that encompasses photographs, films, manuscripts and documents, as well as artistic and cultural value items. All of this provide a deep and unique insight into the work and life of one of the greatest communicators and renowned explorers of the 20th century. He was a source of inspiration for generations of people then and now, and that's partly why we're here together in this place. And this is not just in the region of Larvik, Norway, or Andorra, but also throughout the world. His archives were registered in 2000, or submitted, I should say, in 2010, and they were registered in the year of 2011. The UNESCO theme this year, actually, and it takes place on today's date, November 10th, is Building Trust in Science. One of the things that Tur Heyerdahl also talked about throughout his work. The Tur Heyerdahl International Day and Conference and the series have been organized by the Institute since 2006, which makes this the 16th anniversary. The event honors Tur Heyerdahl's cultural heritage, and we seek to develop his legacy even further. We know that he was a global activist of the environment. He highlighted international dialogue, and he was an immense supporter towards the unity of mankind and world peace. I did talk to one of my colleagues going over here who's from the United States, and he did confirm that he learned and was taught about Thor Heyerdahl in school in Minnesota when he was young. So we know that he is well known outside of his two countries in terms of Italy and Norway. He was very interested in anthropology, archaeology, discoveries through experience, science, oceans, and seeing the oceans as a pathway. He was a photographer and a writer and deeply engaged in understanding and creating that across borders. And he was politically engaged. You might know that many of his expeditions consisted of a cast of people from a lot of different countries, and that was intentional in terms of showing that people can work together if there is a common goal in mind, despite cultural differences and backgrounds. So today we are looking further into Thor Heyerdahl's goals and work towards cooperation. We will connect to the world today and the situation today, and we want to highlight projects that support the Institute's call and inspiration to act. And the event will contribute and look for solutions to the history that is in the making. One of the things that Thor Heyerdahl said was, "No space is too restrictive for peaceful coexistence of men who work for a common good." I believe also in that statement, and I think he probably would just change men to people. So why are we here in this place? Well, Thor Heyerdahl lived in Kolamakeri for 25 years, and he passed away here on April 18th in 2002. He built a life here with his second wife and all of his children. There are mountains and an ocean, beautiful, so who wouldn't want to be here, right? Norway is very different than Italy, but we do have the oceans and we do have the mountains. So there are some similarities in sort of the geography in this area. Thor Heyerdahl was born in Larvik and had a strong ties to both cities. And I had the pleasure of actually seeing his childhood home this summer, and it was just amazing to think of him running around in that house, looking through the windows and seeing the ocean, and just being inspired by what the ocean could bring him. It was important for Larvik and Andora to make this relationship more of an official relationship. So in 2016, the two cities became twinning cities, trying both to work and hold on to his heritage and make more of what he did back then. The city of Andorra has dedicated a permanent exhibition in the Luciano da Broi Mineralogical Museum of Palazzo Tagliaferro, where we are today. We hope you have a chance to see that exhibit if you haven't already done so, and I know that it is a permanent exhibit, but it has now received more items. So today, one of the things I want to do before we start is also just thanking all of our partners. So again, the Comune de Andorra, thank you so much for hosting us. Palazzo Tagliaferro, for letting us be in this place. The municipality of Larvik, where Thor Heyerdahl was born. Vestfold and Telemark County Council, the Vestfold Museum, and then Augsburg University, which I represent. We would like to thank all of our partners for making this event possible, so thank you. Also want to give a big thank you to Renata Tiramani, who is the master of organizing. Thank you, Renata. And also to Christine Enrile for all of the work that you've done setting this up. Thank you. Grazie. You are our generous host today, and we are so thankful for all the preparations and your hospitality. I would also like to thank Bettina and Marianne Heyerdahl for their hospitality yesterday. We had the experience of being able to walk around up at Kolamikeri. And so I thank you for opening up your house and your space to us. It was just amazing, even though it was raining. We could kind of see and understand the love of that place. So thank you so much. Take some time to flip these pages, but that's just. So we're going to move now into opening remarks. We have 5 people who would like to share a little bit of opening of a welcome to all of us, which I think also signifies the support that the Thor Heyerdahl Institute gets, but also the partnership it has built. I'm going to name all 5 of you, and then you can go up one after another. So the opening remarks first is going to be of the Mayor of Andorra, Mr. De Michelis Mauro. It's going to be followed by Norwegian Ambassador to Italy, Johan Kristoffer Wibe, who is not here with us, but he has a video greeting. And then the Director of the Vestfold Museum, Lene Valle. After Lene Valle, we're going to invite Liselotte Auneli to come up. She is a regional politician and a lawyer of trade, representing the Labour Party, right? And then finally, we're going to get a video snippet of the mayor of Larvik, whose name is Birgitte Gulle Løken. So I'm going to try to say this in Italian too. It is Le lascio la parola. Welcome to the stage.
Porgo il benvenuto a tutti i relatori del Thor Heyerdahl International Day 2023, presenti ad Andorra o collegati in remoto. La nostra comunità è onorata di accogliere questo importante evento internazionale e ringrazio il The Westfold Museum, il Thor Heyerdahl Institute, il Westfold and Telemark, l'Augsburg University, l'Università degli Studi di Genova, la famiglia Heyerdahl, che è qui presente, la CIE Contemporary di Cristina Enrile, l'assessorato alla cultura del Comune di Andorra per il grande lavoro fatto per l'organizzazione e l'accoglienza. Naturalmente saluto le autorità militari e civili presenti.
I want to welcome all lecturers of the Thor Heyerdahl International Day 2023 here in Andorra or connected remotely. Our community is honored to welcome this important international event, and I thank the Vestfold Museums, the Thor Heyerdahl Institute, the Vestfold and Telemark County Council, the Augsburg University, and the University of Genoa. The Heyerdahl family here in Andorra, CE Contemporary of Christine Enrile, and the Department of Culture of the municipality in Andorra for the great work done for the organization and reception. And I also want to welcome all the civil and military authority present today.
Questo convegno è un importante momento di riflessione su temi contemporanei che il grande esploratore e studioso norvegese che abbiamo avuto l'onore di avere qui ad Andorra ha trattato con grande lungimiranza ben 50 anni fa.
This conference is an important moment of reflection on contemporary themes that the great Norwegian explorer and scholar treated with great foresight already 50 years ago, an explorer who lived in Andorra.
Come è noto, gli spostamenti dei popoli sono stati al centro dei suoi studi e delle sue spedizioni e certamente, non devo dirlo a questa autorevole platea, ma mi piace sottolineare l'impegno anche a favore alla tutela del mare e dell'ambiente, quale eredità che è stata lasciata da Thor Heyerdahl alla comunità di Andorra.
Migrations were at the center of his studies and of his expeditions, and certainly I don't need to explain that to such a distinguished audience, but I would like to underline the commitment to protecting the sea and the environment, a legacy that he also left to Andorra.
Credo sia importante ricordare la denuncia di Thor Heyerdahl dell'inquinamento nell'Atlantico, quando con la spedizione del Ra constatò la presenza di macchie di petrolio sulla superficie del mare, una scoperta che fu resa nota anche alle Nazioni Unite.
It is extremely important to remember Thor Heyerdahl's denouncement of the pollution he witnessed in the Atlantic Ocean during the Ra expedition, when he saw the presence of oil stains on the surface of the water, a discovery that was brought to the attention of the United Nations.
Durante il viaggio del Ra 2, nei 43 giorni dei 57 di viaggio, furono trovati alcuni grumi solidi di petrolio. Heyerdahl presentò alcune relazioni sul problema dell'inquinamento anche alla prima conferenza internazionale delle Nazioni Unite sull'ambiente che si è svolta a Stoccolma nel 1972, portando a un divieto di scarico di oli usati in mare aperto.
During the Ra II's voyage, solid clumps of oil were found on 43 of the 57 days of the voyage. Heyerdahl also presented some reports on the problem of pollution at the first United Nations International Conference on the Environment, held in Stockholm in 1972, leading to a ban on the discharge of waste oils into the open sea.
Andora è grata per la lezione ambientale data da Heyerdahl, che è nel cuore e nei ricordi di coloro che hanno avuto l'onore di conoscerlo o di capirne la sua grandezza grazie a libri, filmati e per noi andoresi anche attraverso i figli.
Andorra is grateful for this environmental lesson given by Heyerdahl, which is in the hearts and memories of those who had the honor of knowing him or understanding his greatness thanks to books, films, and for us in Andorra thanks to his children.
Marian, Bettina, ma voglio ricordare il compianto caro Bjorn, recentemente scomparso e che ha selezionato alcuni degli oggetti presenti nello spazio Thor Heyerdahl aperto nel 2019 quale primo passo del gemellaggio che dal 2018 lega Andorra all'Arvik e alla collaborazione con l'Istituto Thor Heyerdahl e il Museo Kon-Tiki di Oslo che ho avuto l'onore di visitare.
His children Marian, Bettina, and of course our dear Bjorn, who recently passed away, and who chose some of the objects present in the Thor Heyerdahl exhibition opened in 2019 as the first step of the twinning which has linked Andorra to Larvik since 2018, and to the collaboration with the Thor Heyerdahl Institute at the Kon-Tiki Museum in Oslo.
Porgo il mio saluto al nuovo sindaco di Larvik e il mio omaggio agli amministratori presenti che si sono succeduti in questi anni e che hanno contribuito alla creazione del nostro museo e di tanti eventi di promozione reciproca, sia in Italia che in Norvegia.
I extend my greetings to the new mayor of Larvik and my homage to the present administrators who have succeeded one another in recent years and who have contributed to the creation of the museum and many mutual promotion events both in Italy and abroad.
Andorra ha ricevuto da Heyerdahl un grande patrimonio di consapevolezza dell'importanza della tutela del mare. Un impegno che ha visto impegnato il nostro porto turistico, che è bandiera blu ininterrottamente dal 1987 e che ha ottenuto importanti certificazioni ambientali italiane e internazionali, che impegnano l'approdo a attuare economie di efficienza nei servizi, nel rispetto dell'ambiente, ma anche la soddisfazione completa dei propri clienti a tutela della salute e della sicurezza dei lavoratori.
Andorra received from Heyerdahl a great legacy of awareness of the importance of protecting the sea, a commitment dear to us with our tourist port, which has been awarded with the blue flag continuously since 1987, and which has obtained important Italian and international certification, environmental certification, which implies the implementation of cost effectiveness and efficiency in the services provided by the harbour while respecting the environment, but also the pursuit of full satisfaction of its customers and the health and safety protection of workers.
Il nostro porto di Andora, che è presieduto dal presidente Fabrizio De Nicola, che oggi è qui fra noi, nel settembre 2020 ha ottenuto la registrazione EMAS, unico porto in Liguria. Pochi giorni fa il porto di Andora è stato premiato alla Fiera Ecomondo di Rimini proprio per il suo impegno per l'ambiente e per la diffusione nei porti italiani del simbolo EMAS di qualità ambientale.
Our port that is managed by a company whose president is here today, President De Nicola, in September 2020 was the only Ligurian port to obtain the EMAS registration. A few days ago, the Port of Andora was awarded also at the Ecomondo Fair in Rimini, precisely for its commitment to the environment and the diffusion of the EMAS symbol of environmental quality in Italian ports.
In funzione un apparato che si chiama sia che è un bidone che cattura i rifiuti, raccoglie i materiali grandi e micro portati dalle del porto.
A sea-beam device has been installed in the port. That is some kind of trash bin which collects large and micro materials into the harbor basin.
Il desiderio di attivare un'economia circolare che diminuisca il consumo dell'energia, che favorisca la riconversione dei rifiuti in un circolo virtuoso, ha fatto candidare la Marina di Andora quale marina pilota del progetto Iris, che ha ideato una tecnologia che trasforma i rifiuti plastici in energia con l'obiettivo di rendere almeno in parte autonomo l'approdo.
The desire to activate a circular economy, to reduce its energy consumption and promote the reconversion of waste in circle has made Andorra a candidate as pilot port for the project of the company, which has created a technology that transforms plastic waste in energy with the aim of making the harbor at least partially autonomous.
La salvaguardia dell'ambiente è un impegno quotidiano per Andora ed è il nostro tributo alla grande lezione di Tor Heyerdahl. Ogni volta che ci riuniamo per parlare della sua grande eredità scientifica, etica e umana di Heyerdahl, non lo facciamo soltanto per ricordare con nostalgia il passato, ma per costruire nuovi percorsi verso il futuro, seguendo le orme del suo lungimirante pensiero. Anche oggi la facciamo grazie al vostro prezioso contributo. Grazie.
Environment protection is a daily commitment for Andorra, and it is our tribute to the great lesson learned from Tor Heyerdahl. Every time we gather to talk about Heyerdahl's great scientific, ethical, and human legacy, we do not do so to remember the past with nostalgia, but to build new paths toward the future following in the footsteps of his forward-looking vision. Even today, we do it thanks to your precious contribution. Thank you.
It's an honor for me to address the Tor Heyerdahl International Day 2023 through this video message. Tor Heyerdahl was a man devoted to building bridges between people and cultures, trying to demonstrate that mankind is one. He was committed to dialogue and peace, and never afraid of challenging public opinion. In 1977, he put fire to the vessel Tigris to protest against the brutal war on the Horn of Africa. Deeply concerned about the health of our common planet, he was a pioneer in the fight for the protection of the environment, having seen on his travels the far-reaching damage we are inflicting on Earth. It's good to know that Thor Heyerdahl's vision and commitment are upheld by the team organizing today's event. This year's conference focuses on migration and climate change, two clearly interrelated phenomena that require urgent solutions. Conflict, poverty, and climate change fuel migration. In 2023, we have again reached record numbers of 36 million refugees and 110 million internally displaced people. The numbers will unfortunately keep growing. Thank you to Vestfold and Telemark Fylkeskommune, Augsburg University, La Comune di Andorra, Larvik Kommune, the museums in Vestfold, and the Thor Heyerdahl Institute for organizing this important conference. Having visited Heyerdahl's home in Andorra, I am aware that the area had a very special place in his heart. This also contributed to the special link between Andorra and Larvik, and indeed between Italy and Norway. I wish you all a very productive conference.
Buongiorno a tutti. Hello everyone. Dear Mayor of Andorra, administration and politicians, population of the municipality, coordinators Christina and Lena, Thor Heyerdahl family members, the participants with us here today, participating virtually. Thor Heyerdahl International Day 2023 will, in close cooperation with Augsburg University, Minnesota, USA, and Vestfold and Telemark County Council, address the global topic of migration and climate change today. As director for the Vestfold Museums in Norway, which through Thor Heyerdahl Institute, migration processes also due to climate changes. It is an honor for me to welcome all of you. We are holding this conference on the 10th of November, inspired by UNESCO's World Science Day for Peace and Development. It highlights the significant role of science in society and the need to engage the wider public in debates on emerging scientific issues. It also underlines the importance and relevance of science in our daily lives. The theme of World Science Day on the 10th of November 2023 is Building Trust in Science. The role of science in shaping our collective future can only be fulfilled when there is trust in science. By linking science more closely with society, World Science Day for Peace and Development aims to ensure that citizens are informed of development in science. It also underscores the role scientists play in broadening our understanding on the remarkable fragile planet we call home and in making our societies more sustainable. This day, arranged by UNESCO for decades, encourages and offers the opportunity to mobilize actors around the world in the topic of science, peace and development. Our program will include scientists from an EU project involving 7 countries and a conference of peripheral maritime regions, CPMR, representing almost 2 million people and one of the 5 EU-wide bodies. This year, we are grateful to be able to arrange the day in Andorra municipality, the sister city of Larvik, Thor Heyerdahl's birthplace. Key areas of are Thor Heyerdahl's global effort to protect and conserve the environment, his understanding for and ability to engage dialogue between people of different culture, and his strong will to challenge people to debate on global challenges. The conference today is a conference that aims to be challenging because migration and climate change are difficult topics. At the same time, museums in Norway have a long tradition of addressing difficult topics, the ones no one wants to talk about, those with taboos attached to them. This includes topics such as forced migration, the treatment of refugees, and treatment of those who come to country to work. This also includes climate challenges and their long-term consequences for nature and societies. Museums in Norway can't point out injustice, and many take a stand for making a noun as noun. How does it feel to be a migrant? How does it feel to come to a new country? Is one welcomed or an outsider? Museums in Norway have the ability to be critical, also regarding politicians and politics, but that is not the case in all European countries. One of the main goals of the Vestfold Museum is to be inclusive. We are working on ways of both highlighting and putting this into practice, and are very happy to be able to work with and benefit from the research and development and the documentation carried out by Vestfold Museum and their groundbreaking EU project Identity on the Line. We are also encouraged and inspired by the high-quality contributions of high school students to the Thor Heyerdahl Scholarship this year on the subject of migration and climate change. So, welcome, velkommen, som vi sier in Norwegian, and benvenuto to our conference today here in beautiful Andorra. Thank you.
Dear family of Thor Heyerdahl, Mayor of Andorra, and to all participants with us here in person and participating also virtually. Buongiorno, good morning. It is such a pleasure Italy that Thor Heyerdahl loved as much as Norway. The beautiful Ligurian village of Kolamikeri was his address for a large part of his life. He was born in the coastal town of Larvik on October 6th in 1914 in Telemark County, which I represent, and he became a true citizen of the world with his nature and also with faith in scientific dreams. He had an unlimited love for people. I feel honored on behalf of Telemark County to have been invited here today to say a few words at this opening of the Thor Heyerdahl International Day of 2023. And Vestfold and Telemark County is often referred to as a Norway in miniature. The region extends from coastal through the fjords, valleys to the high mountains. For many years, the county has worked for tolerance and inclusion. And today, the county is a diverse community with patents. The topic for today's conference is migration and climate change. Areas of society are more relevant than ever, and is an important investment in the country both administratively and politically. Every person on this planet faces climate, environmental and social challenges, and it is only together that we can solve these complex challenges. Going forward, We need to focus on the climate, migration, and identity to renew our knowledge so that the next generation inherits a healthier planet with more equality and less conflicts. As you well know, Thor Heyerdahl did not see borders. He saw the people. And it is a lesson for all of us to see the uniqueness of each person on our planet, especially with the large migrations taking place around the globe today. To the very interesting speakers today, where I know we will be inspired and receive important messages and good practices to carry with us in our work on these topics further. So, thank you for your attention.
I have been to Andorra once and it's great, I love it. And I look really forward to future cooperation with you about Thor Heyerdahl.
Thank you all of you. Welcome. We are learning about Thor different perspectives, I think, by just listening to your welcome. So thank you for taking the time. Yes, we are now going to get into our speakers. I just want to contextualize climate change issue a little bit. We know that obviously migration is something that has happened years and years past, but we are seeing an increase obviously in mass migration now. And some of that migration is largely caused by climate change. According to the UN Refugee Agency, the impacts of climate change are to leave their home and move to other areas each year. So this kind of migration, when people leave their home, weather events, including droughts and wildfires, slower moving climate challenges such as rising seas and intensifying water stress. All of those are factors and indicators, and people will need to leave their homes. The regions then that will be hit the hardest, according to the Council on Foreign Relations, is Latin America, South Asia, and the Sub-Saharan Africa. These are among the most vulnerable places that will be affected by climate change and is already affected. More than half of the developing world's population lives in these three regions, and many live in vulnerable areas, some of which are already experiencing this climate migration crisis. The World Bank estimates that these regions could altogether produce 143 million internal climate migrants by 2050. That is a lot of people, 143 million people. And those are mostly talked about in terms of people migrating within their own countries. There is hard to estimate the cross-border migration, but we all know that that is already happening. In 1951, the UN Refugee Convention, which was created to manage the European refugees from World War II, as well as its expansion or convention in 1967, established the fundamental rights of refugees. These refugees are mostly in the area and the grouping of violence and persecution and the needing to leave their country. However, migrants fleeing climate extremes are not currently protected under any international law, and there is no consensus on how to legally define them. Some experts argue that these individuals should indeed have the same legal status as refugees. Proponents of classification climate refugee point out that such a designation would provide these individuals with expanded protections, including access to legal services and planned relocations. It would be also a signal from wealthier countries, often the source of climate emission and climate change, a warning and also putting them on the map in terms of this is what is happening in the world. I think it's interesting to think about Italy and Norway because Norway has made a lot of its wealth due to gas and oil, which we continue to export. And Italy is now receiving a lot of immigrants from Africa. Last year, the total was 127,000 refugees that came to Italy by water. In 2022, to this day today, we have 105,000. So they are obviously assuming that that number will rise even more. So today we are proud, in a way, to say that we have a wonderful list of speakers. Well, we are proud that we have a wonderful list of speakers, but in terms of putting this big topic on the agenda, migration and climate change. The program is indeed full. It's full of wisdom, research, and practical examples from both the global stage, specifically Italy, Norway, Europe, the United States, and also some examples from international educational experiences. So we hope that you're going to learn from our speakers, that you will be inspired, and that you will act towards solutions. We want to see our challenges also as opportunities. And we know that that is something that Thor Heyerdahl did and would be proud to hear that we continue to do. Last year, we focused a lot on museums. This year will be more focused on the academic world. We're going to hear from a lot of professors and our president from Augsburg University. So we are now going to start presenting or having our speakers come up and present. I'm going to do a little introduction of Paul Pribbenau. I also just want to say that you have a beautiful program in your hands that were left on your chairs. I would read that from page 1 to the very back. There's lots of wonderful information in there. There's also some QR codes where you can actually read more about the partners. So, Paul Pribbenau is the 10th president of Augsburg University, which I am lucky to serve. He is recognized as one of the country's most engaging commentators and teachers on ethics, philanthropy, and American public life. He will talk today about the role of colleges and universities as engines of social mobility, interfaith living, and community well-being, and how these factors are a part of Augsburg University's mission and goals. The title of this lecture is So That All May Flourish, Higher Education in the Immigrant Experience. Please welcome Paul Pribbenau.
Thank you, Bettina. It is a wonderful privilege to be with all of you. We are so grateful for the generous hospitality of our friends here in Andorra, in this beautiful part of the world. And we are particularly proud to be part of this international collaboration involving Norway, Italy, and the United States. So as Bettina mentioned, I am the president, the rector of Augsburg University. And as she mentioned in her opening remarks, we have a particular tie to Norway because we were founded by Norwegian immigrants 154 years ago who came to a new country to live a new life, to be able to have a better life for themselves and their families. And they built institutions like Augsburg University in order to teach their children so that they might also have a better life. And 154 years later, we are still doing the same thing. And that is a part of the kind of wonder of the arc of our history is that founded by Norwegian immigrants, we are now an institution serving immigrant students. About 20% of our students are themselves either the children of immigrants or immigrants. And that had a kind of education we offer, and that's what I want to talk to you about today. I am no expert on climate science, but I am the leader of an institution where the role of climate and migration has had an impact, where many of our students who come to us from East Africa or from Mexico have themselves had their affected by drought, by famine, by changes in the climate that force them to lead. They go to refugee camps and then they come to the United States. And it's also the case, as I mentioned earlier, also the case that for all of our students, climate change is right now the central issue that is shaping their lives. They are deeply aware of how they are inheriting a world where, in fact, climate change is happening and that they need to find ways to respond to that and to challenge us to find ways to respond to that. And that is, again, a part of our daily life at Augsburg University. I've chosen this because I want to make a moral claim here, and I'm going to use University as an example, but I actually believe that any institution in our world needs to think about the moral claim that comes with what it means to help all flourish in their lives. That means that whether it's a government, whether it's a nonprofit organization, an NGO, whether it is a university, we have a responsibility in response to the immigrant experiences that are coming to us to lean in on how we can help them flourish. That claim that I take very but you also see a picture, it's a little hard probably to see from a distance there in the middle, but it is our newest building on campus. It's called the Hagfors Center for Science, Business, and Religion. And it's a very important part of our lives, and it's actually part of our commitment to thinking about the integration of disciplines. The other thing you'll notice for my Norwegian friends here is that the colors of the building are colors taken from the fjords in Norway. We took pictures of the fjords and we chose colors that stood out and actually built those into the architecture of the building. So very proud of our Norwegian heritage. So let me talk just a bit, if we can figure out how to move the slides here. Is it up and down, or is it, you'll probably need to move the slides for me if you could. So this is not. Next slide, please. Thank you. So Augsburg University, as I mentioned, founded in 1869, has been in the Minneapolis-St. Paul region for 154 years. We think of ourselves as an urban settlement. We actually have settled into a neighborhood alongside of our neighbors, and as I mentioned, those neighbors have changed many times, but they've often been immigrant populations, and we have lived alongside of them. We're located in the Cedar Riverside neighborhood in the South Minneapolis, and as I mentioned, primarily now, the immigrants that we're serving are either East African, Somali, or Ethiopian, or students. Families moving to us in life, and we have the privilege to serve those students. Next slide, please. So one way to think about what we've been able to do at Augsburg is that we have the arc of being founded by immigrants and then now serving immigrant students. And so what does it mean to have an immigrant sensibility? How do we think about how we change the way we do what we do every day because the immigrant comes? I think this is one of the biggest challenges for us in working with migration. That is, when people from different lived experiences, different backgrounds come into our institutions, into our communities, into our neighborhoods, how do we respond not by imposing our on them, but in fact by learning from them so that we might change the way we work together. I see this live out every day on our campus as we have more and more immigrant students joining us. They are challenging us to teach differently, to research differently, to think about our lives together differently. And we're learning from their cultural traditions things that are important about our lives together. And so in many ways, the three themes that I've picked to highlight today about our work with immigrant students, in fact, go to how we are in fact changing as an institution in response to our immigrant students. Next slide, please. First, I want to talk about social mobility, and this is really at the core of what universities do. We think about how education of our students equips them to live lives of meaning and purpose in the world, to be able to pursue a particular career or profession. but at the same time to give back to their families and communities. And this is what our Norwegian founders believed when they came to our country. They were seeking a better life for themselves. The students who came to our university at that point, in fact, then received an education, were able to go out, build businesses, serve in leadership roles, and then be able to give back to their families, to become very active in their communities. And when I think about that today, that's exactly what's happening. Our Somali students come to us, and they do a degree in business. So these are Somali students whose families were forced to leave Somalia because of combination of war and famine and drought, to go to refugee camps, to come to the United States, to settle in our neighborhood, and then to come to Augsburg University to receive an education, perhaps in business or in finance or in sociology. And what they do with that degree then is they go out into the world and they found businesses. So, for example, we have in our neighborhood, founded by a group of Somali young women, a thrift shop, a small clothing shop that actually serves their families. It allows their families to have access to clothing that they would otherwise not be able to afford. It's just a sign of how they're paying it forward. They take their education and they use it to build a business so in fact their families can be supported and their neighborhood can be a safer place. The picture in the middle here is of Huve Meza, was a student of ours. He's an undocumented student, that is, came to the United States illegally with his family so that they could seek a better life. Huve came to our university, received an education, was in fact the president of the Student Government Association. He now has just finished law school, and he is actually serving as an immigrant attorney, an immigration attorney in the Twin Cities, in Minneapolis and St. Paul. So simple examples of how students come to us to receive an education, migrant students, immigrant students, so that they can in fact live out the commitments that our forefathers and mothers had for the role of education in serving migrant populations. Next slide, please. I think one of the central questions that we're facing today in our world is, in fact, the issue of different faith traditions and how we come together. We only need to point to what's going on in Gaza and Palestine and Israel at the moment to see the clashes that we're seeing between different religious traditions. Because of who our students are, at this point, 15 of our students at Augsburg University are in fact Muslim. We also have a Jewish population, other faith traditions that represent it. And I believe that, in fact, have a particular role with immigrant populations to take advantage of the ways that those faith traditions have come together in our institutions so that we can think about religion as a force for good and not a force for division in the world. And what we've seen is a remarkable and robust programming around interfaith, what I call interfaith living, not necessarily interfaith dialogue, but interfaith living. And so you get some example here, a picture on the right of Najiba Saeed, who is our El Hebri professor of interfaith leadership. You have a group of students there in the middle who are interfaith scholars. And so what we're doing in a whole variety of ways in the curriculum, in our co-curriculum, in our community engagement work, we are thinking about how we are bringing together people from different faith traditions so that they can learn to live together. And what we're finding, interestingly enough, is that there is much demand for the lessons we've learned about interfaith in corporations and businesses in the United States. So we're now doing training in major businesses about faith together because people are coming into those jobs, those professions, from different faith traditions. And so to think about how, again, it does not have to divide us, but how can religion be a source of commonality in the world. And we see that as a central part of the work that we've been called to do because of the immigrant students that have come to us. And finally, higher education and community well-being. This, of course, is at the heart, and perhaps, in particular with the climate change, we see that the need to come together to think about how what we're doing, not just on our campus, which is certainly an important part of what we do, but also how we serve our neighbors. And as I mentioned earlier, our neighborhood, it's the most diverse male code, zip code, we call it in the US, between Chicago and Los Angeles. And so we have day in and day out immigrants who live in our neighborhood. And as we think about our work as a university, that is certainly an important part of what happens in the neighborhood, but it is also the case that, for example, during the COVID pandemic, our immigrant neighbors had food insecurity, did not have access to the food they needed. So nutritional programs, what we could do to provide food for them. We have concerns about safety in our neighborhood, so how are we responding to that together? We have opportunities to teach our immigrant neighbors how to take and navigate the various systems in the U.S., the bureaucracies, the government bureaucracies, and how can they find support for their lives and their work. And so this, in many ways, is about building a more healthy, more compassionate neighborhood, and thinking about how the role of the university in that work is not to stand apart from that work, not to stand above that work, but actually to lean into and engage that work every day. And that has been made possible. And we've been able to model that because those immigrant neighbors have been willing to engage with us and to see the university as a partner and not as an adversary in the work of building a healthier neighborhood. So I'll close with just 4 simple lessons that we've learned that I believe are relevant for any entity that is thinking about its work with migrant populations. First of all, we have to make this work central to our mission and to our strategy. So if you're a mayor or you're someone who leads an NGO or an institute or someone who leads a university, this work has to be seen as central. It can't be peripheral to what you're doing. And as we more and more have the opportunity to serve immigrant populations, we need especially to think about how we build this into our strategy. At the same time, it's not good enough for the mayor or the president to say, we're going to do this work and have that be kind of imposed on the community. It has to be work that both has the support from leadership, but also has an organic, in a sense, from the ground up across the institution. And that is certainly important to think about how you integrate this work across everything. The mayor has talked about many of the projects here in Andorra, and so how in sports, how in culture, how in different areas are we in fact integrating our commitment to working with immigrants into the work we do. And finally, at the heart of what we do as a university, and what I believe is important to all of us here, is to see democratic engagement, the work that we do together, as an ethic that guides us. Not simply the machinery of government that we might call a democracy, but in fact, democracy as a social ethic. It is something that ties us together where we believe, in fact, that we are better together than we are alone. And I think in many ways, this gathering itself is in response to these issues of migration and climate change is certainly an example of how we are living out that ethic. And it's a great pleasure to be with you, and I look forward to my colleagues' speeches here that will follow. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, President Pribanow. I think this is a great example of showing that some of the challenges that we might face are turned into opportunities, and I think that's a wonderful place to serve. I am extremely happy to be at Augsburg University, which of course is a university that strives to welcome our newcomers and to learn from newcomers in terms of different cultural backgrounds. And the population of Augsburg has obviously changed dramatically since the founding years, 154 years ago. Thank you so much. We are going to now move over to Professor Mauro Sportorno. He is a professor of economics and political geography at the University of Genoa, Italy. This session will include the most recent studies of global climatic change and how the studies emphasize the relationship between the situation of prolonged drought, degradation of agricultural land, desertification, and the mobility of human communities settled in the spaces involved. This specific study is a case study of the Haous of Marrakech, which is an area in Morocco. And the title of today's lecture is The Impact of the Global Climatic Changes and the Rural Societies, Migration versus Transformation. Lo lascio la parola.
Molte grazie. Thank you so much. Good morning. I apologize for my English. It's not so good, but I hope that you can understand my contribution. For me, it's a pleasure to be here today and an honor. I'm going to talk about the impact of global climatic change on the rural societies. subtitle, Migration versus Transformation. Migration and transformation. Which possibility for the rural populations? I studied it in the particular reality of Morocco, the house of Marrakesh. Migration, the next one, okay. Migration is a complex phenomenon, as you can see in the slide, whose etiology can be traced back to a multiplicity of factors, as you can see. Demographic, economic, social, political, historic, so on, and so on. But the most recent studies on global climatic change place particular emphasis on the relationship between situations on prolonged drought, degradation of agricultural land, and mobility of the human community settled in the spaces involved, in particular on rural populations for whom agriculture constitutes the main source of subsistence. Among the main drivers of the phenomenon, there are undoubtedly the average increase in temperatures, the greater frequency of drought periods, and the growing unpredictability of their occurrence. All these determines a worsening of the living condition of the rural population and therefore an increase in their propensity to migrate. Our thesis, however, is that immigration is not an inevitable fate. Indeed, modern technologies and appropriate strategies can help mitigate this impact. Okay. So now I analyze the nexus between global climatic change, agriculture, and resilience in the perspective of the migration phenomena. In the most part of developing countries, a large part of the agricultural production intended to ensure the subsistence of their population comes from rain-fed agriculture. That is, from agricultural activities guaranteed solely by rainfall. The global climate change negatively affects agricultural activities, but at the same time, there is an increase in the population living on subsistence agriculture. Faced with the concomitant action of these two phenomena, different reaction can be had, each corresponding to a different level of community resilience. The concept of community resilience is widely exploited today, and not always in an appropriate way. Concisely, and with a certain approximation, we can state that it expresses the characteristic of a social system to react to a stress deriving from the outside without suffering a breakdown in its internal coherence. However, since resilience is not synonymous with immobility, we must consider the possibility of introducing innovation from outside, including technological ones. However, in order to avoid a break in the evolutionary continuum of the system, strategies must be adopted that integrate endogenous responses with those offered by the technology, guaranteeing to the farmers both the possibility of improving or at least maintaining unchanged the productivity of their activities and reducing their dependence on climate risk and in particular on the water stress. In this way, they could continue to practice traditional crops, perhaps in an innovative way, thus remaining anchored to their territory and persevering its identity. This implies that intervention aimed at counteracting the effects of the global climatic change at the local level are not based only on the large project, such as those linked to large-scale hydraulic engineering. You can see an example here, near to Marrakesh. Conversely, they will have to aim at the renewal of traditional agriculture, following an open approach to light innovations. This type of intervention is based on some assumption. On a political and administrative level, they imply a good level of decentralization, which, however, must be in coherence with the necessary subsidiarity of the state. Secondly, it will be necessary to pursue the strengthening of education and school training, including specialist ones. Finally, it will be necessary to pursue an adequate transfer along the north-south axis, both of technologies and the capital necessary for their introduction. In this sense, an important contribution can be made both by remittance from immigrants and by return flow of emigrants, as bearers of capital, knowledge, and mentality open to innovation. Now, there is the case of Morocco. Let's now see how this concept can be applied to the case of the House of Marrakesh in Morocco. Contrary to the dominant stereotype, Morocco presents a notable variety of climate types. The country receives an average rainfall equal to 140 billion cubic meters, with a water resource potential estimated in 22 billion cubic meters. Parenthesis, I am a geographer, can you see? However, in recent decades, rainfall has decreased considerably, with peaks of minus 30% in areas less exposed to humid Atlantic currents. It is expected that at the end of the century, the decrease in cumulative precipitation will be between 10 and 20% if the most optimistic hypothesis following the implementation on the Paris Agreement occur, but of the order of 40% in the absence of limitation to greenhouse gas emissions. At the same time, temperatures could record an increase between 1.1 and 1.6 Celsius degree. However, what may have the greatest impact on traditional agricultural activities will be the increasing frequency and duration of drought periods and the growing uncertainty regarding their intensity, duration, and when they may occur. While between 1940 and 1979 there were only 5 drought periods, with an average of 1 every 8 years, between 1980 and 2002, there were 10 with an average of 1 every 2 years. On the other hand, in this context of environmental change, the need for water resources is increasing as a consequence of both the increase in population and of the growth of industrial and tourist activities. This results in a decrease in the availability of water per inhabitant. Already today in Morocco, it is lower, the level is lower than the water stress threshold, corresponding to 1,000 cubic meters inhabitant per year. But it is rapidly approaching that of absolute scarcity, that is 500 cubic meter inhabitant year. In Italy, the level is 3,000. 3,000. Currently, the crop growing period is from November to April, but all available climate models predict that by 2050 it could be reduced to November, March, and by 2090 to January, March. We can easily imagine what the consequence of all this could be for the country if you consider that agriculture guarantees the livelihood of 40% of the population, a percentage that rises to 74 if only rural areas are considered. Now we consider the case of the House of Marrakesh. The House of Marrakesh is a vast alluvial plain, you can see in the slide, that extends of an area approximately of 4,000 square kilometers, slightly more than Molise in Italy, slightly larger than Aosta Valley. Located at an average altitude of 500 meters. Its morphology is monotonous with a steppe appearance. Its climate is arid continental. Rainfall are rare, irregular, and scarce, and on average, annual rainfall is less than 300 millimeters. Temperatures present strong contrast between the winter average, around 5 Celsius degree in January, and the summer one, 45 Celsius degree in July. Due to the global climatic change, however, there is both an average annual decrease in their volume of approximately 1.9 millimeters and an increase in average annual temperatures. The region's economy is essentially based on agriculture, and 87% of its population derives their income from it. It is therefore not surprising that in the House region, since the drought periods have increased in frequency and intensity, there has been a growing migratory flow, mainly directed toward European countries and in particular Italy, towards which consolidated migratory chains have long been existing. 80% of the migrants are married, but in 80% of cases, only men leave. However, in recent years, there has been an increase in the weight of women among migrants, and among these, there is an increasing number of those who leave the country as heads of family. In fact, the consequences of mass migration on local rural society are multiple, and among these, there are substantial changes in the role of women within the family and society. In fact, due to the distancing of adult men, women increasingly have to cover functions traditionally attributed to them. But migration also has positive effects on the area of departure on an economic level, promoting its development. Monetary transfer from residents abroad contribute to the improvement of the living condition of family remaining at home, and often to the modernization or creation from scratch of agricultural company in this area. What are the migration effects and the relation to on global climatic change through the adoption of forms of smart agriculture? This is a question. The majority of farmers interviewed in the field works appear to be aware of the risk generated by the global climatic change. 75 of them clearly perceive the decrease in precipitation, the increase in temperatures, and the increase in the duration, frequency, and incertitude of drought periods. But the adoption of the practices of intelligent agriculture requires the availability of basic skills, the dissemination by the state of adequate information in this regard, and a certain availability of capital. Unfortunately, over 28% of farmers are illiterate. Only 65% know how to read and write, and 27, despite knowing how to read and write, do not have any educational qualification. That is a problem. However, despite these difficulties, there are some encouraging signs. For example, the agricultural area equipped with drop-by-drop irrigation in the house of Marrakesh, drop-by-drop irrigation system, has gone from 128,000 hectares in 2008 to the current 542,000 hectares. And the number of companies using modern fertigation system with a mixture of intrants and water is also increasing. Certainly, a contribution in this sense is given by the introduction of non-agricultural income into the agricultural system, and among these, those generated by immigration take on particular importance. In conclusion, I'm sorry. Not yet. The impacts of the global climatic change are of particular importance in many developing countries. The response strategies adopted by local communities can be different. The most frequent consists in strengthening of migratory flows. This is contrasted with that of implementing technologies that allow the activation of forms of intelligent agriculture, that allow rational use of resources, in particular water, and to improve crop yields and therefore farmers' income opportunities. A good example in these processes is the house of Marrakesh. The analysis of the available statistical data and the investigation carried out on the ground show the correlation between climate change, contraction in agricultural productivity per hectare of cultivated area, and migration. However, signs of new response method emerge from the field investigation. It is sometimes the result of the remittances of migrants, and in still others, of the initiative of returning migrants. In all cases, we are witnessing an attempt to introduce innovation which, without distorting the structure of a rural society, allow to move from a regressive evolutionary phase marked to a significant extent by rural exodus and immigration to one in which implement new models of exploitation of the environment that allow its regeneration and ensure sustainable management of natural resources. Ultimately, in this way, a virtuous path would be activated between migration, policies of decentralization of agricultural development, transfer of capital, transfer of knowledge and technologies, improvement of its economic conditions, possibility of further investment, and so on, in a circular way. Obviously, this would not be a panacea, capable of solving all the problems of enormous size and complexity, as we have seen in the beginning of my presentation, which afflict most of the countries of the southern countries, and which are strengthened by the global climatic change. However, such a path could contribute, perhaps even only locally, to their mitigation. Thank you for attention.
Thank you so much, Professor Sportono. Again, seeing some challenges turning into opportunities, but also seeing the effect on droughts in certain areas. It ties very well into the theme that we're going to have next year when talking about our thirsty planet. Thank you so much. The next one up is Professor Luisa Faldini. Luisa Faldini is Assistant Professor of Ethnology at the University of Genoa in Italy. She is an American anthropologist. She has more than 100 publications. She is a translator, consultant for museums and institutions, and a research coordinator, to name a few accomplishments. Seriously, wonderful. Her title for this lecture is called Climate, Crisis, and Population Movements. She will talk about the increasingly frequent population movements both within nations and between continents. The United States has received movements from Mexico and Central America, whereas Europe has largely seen African migrations. The defense immigration policies have not produced the expected results and have not emphasized internal displacements. Today, Professor Faldini will shed a light on this topic. We welcome you to the stage.
Thank you. And good morning to everybody, and I want to thank you, the organization, for inviting me to this interesting Tour Heyerdahl International Day. Today is an occasion for me to meet again some friends as Beate Björge, Ryder Zolvik, Bettina Heyerdahl, and other Italian friends like Cristina Enrile, Renata Tiramani, my good friend, my best friend here, and Mauro Spotorno. I have to say that there is some changes in my, in my interview, but because I changed something. And so I will look at the youth issue from a general point of view, considering European only, European side only. What I want to underline first is the population migrations, whether due to economic crisis, cataclysms, or climate changes, are not a modern phenomenon. Simply, in the past, the world population was smaller, and the spaces available were obviously larger. Although there have been historical mass migrations, often corresponding to peaceful or hostile conquest, as the barbarian invasions in Europe, the Cushites who invaded Ethiopia and other territories, the Turkish and Arab conquest, and also, millennia before, the population of the Americas and Oceania. Even if this migration don't affect us much today, let's try to think about how were the feelings of the population of Italian Peninsula, for example, when faced with the invasion of the Huns of the Vandals. I imagine these feelings were certainly greater than feelings of many today Italians on the migration from Africa, even if these actually don't occur for reason of conquest. These feelings are not a surprise, as everything unknown or sudden and change the balance is seen as something to be counteracted. But in the past, the numbers were certainly different, and the tendency in certain cases was inclusion, to overcome the problems dictated by diversity. And the ancient Greeks, for example, and the Romans were masters on this. Today, the extensive increase in the world population together with the industrial and technical progress, not least agricultural, has intensely changed this land. And in this regard, I only remember what a natural science researcher, Dr. Gaudenzio Paola of the University of Genoa, told me over 40 years ago. Look, we don't need to intervene when the source no longer provides water, because the water will never return. You must intervene as soon as you see that the flow of water decreases. The meaning of this sentence also concerns migratory factors, as not understanding or not wanting to understand their meaning has led to today's situation in Europe, in which this continent tries to use measures that, one after the other, are failing completely. I also believe that thinking that modernity could make our lives easier without seeing its side effects was the biggest mistake of many European nations, with some exceptions. In fact, the Northern European nations, and here we have a Norwegian representation, precisely because they are hosted in a sort of extreme environment, have characterized their policies on the needs of the territory and have created a national ideology linked to the connection with nature. Other nations, European nations, have not followed the same path. In the early 2000s, together with colleagues from various Italian universities, I presented a research project to the Ministry of University and Research of Italy, which was rejected. I believe in favor of the one on San Francisco, I don't remember, St. Augustine, saying that it did not seem feasible, but that in fact it was. It was a project that examined rural urban movements, especially African ones, with the aim of outlining lines of interventions that took into account the territory, local economies, and any crisis due to climate, terrorism, and more. In that project, we stated that international agencies often did not have a clear vision of events and how much these events could influence the future, and we were specifically referring to the famous millennial goals developed by European Union in the 90s of the last century, never reached, and that I think everyone has forgotten. This is to say that up until a certain period, there was an underestimation of migration phenomena, both internal or between nations. And then were made attempts to intervene with hasty, unthought out, and suitable means only when the phenomenon became massive and seemingly unstoppable. So now I will give some basic information on African events, skipping the era of colonization. Decolonization, unfortunately, did not end relations between colonizers and colonized, and the countries of the last ones continued to be exploited from an economic point of view and more. Africa, in fact, is an area where all drugs are always tested, and for this reason, pharmaceutical companies have been and are ready to pay a lot of money to local governments. In the former colonies, dependence on the Europe is seen in many ways, from the CFA franc beaten in France to the constraints dictated by independence treaties, as well as from the fact that local rulers are corrupted or even worse are unleashed, for example in Libya, to obtain this or that. As a true policy of autonomy and harmony between African states has never been promoted can be seen in the artificial border deriving from the colonial zone divided between European countries, a factor which has given rise to wars between peoples who have always been enemies, or to war of religions, as in the case of Burundi and Nigeria, which today don't have still peace. Added to this are economic and climate problems. In the first case, the establishment of monocultures has led wage workers to no longer take care of their own gardens in the area where they are farmers, and to depend on the salary that does not allow them to live adequately. This impoverishment pushes toward the country-city movement, as in the city, there are more resources, and at least, even if you don't work, you can find food into the garbage. Hence, out of despair, migratory movements arise. At the same time, climate changes, known since decades, have now strongly altered the situation in some regions, as we see, for example, the recent floods in Libya, an unprecedented event which have swept away, even in the Mediterranean Sea, hundreds and hundreds of bodies. Floods, earthquakes, wars, and poverty have produced migration towards Europe for the poorest and internal areas of Morocco first, then from Senegal, from the Horn of Africa, and subsequently from Nigeria and Congo. Groups of persuaders of what we can call the migration industry convinced in various states the possibilities of work and a better life in Europe, where, following the colonial processes, many migrants already lived, especially in France, Germany, and Great Britain. Over time, different routes towards Europe have been chosen: the Libyan route, the Spanish route, the Turkish route, the Tunisian route, arriving now just to two major routes, the Turkish and the Tunisian ones. Europe tried to block these routes by giving large funds to Turkey and Tunisia, with relative success on the part of Germany, Turkish route, and without any success on the part of Italy, Tunisian route, as we have seen a few months ago. It does not seem that Europe, from the beginning, has ever fully understood the African situation, and above all, the needs of refugees from wars, climate disasters, and the situation of economic crisis. In the past, she merely announced the contest for NGOs, sometimes with ridiculous objectives, such as making village mothers understand the food pyramid in regions, those between Congo and Burundi, where the best nutrition food was paste or peanuts. When migratory flows grew, Europe realized that she was in emergency, but she was not able to devise suitable structures and mechanisms. I don't know if there are large-scale European projects for reception other than the Dublin Agreement that makes bear only to the Southern European countries the impact of continuous migration waves. A multi-year plan of intervention would be needed, but we know that generally the projects of the governments of each country are not long-term, having to obtain results at the end of their mandate. But this long-term plan would already be a starting point. Developing a 20-year plan of intervention in African territory in the areas affected by greatest climate change is really necessary. For Africa, tourism could offer good possibilities even in poor regions, but in the 6 years of our survey project in different African states, we have seen that at the moment the local impact of tourism is only the 2%, and more in the countryside, where it is possible to promote tourism at a resident home. The problem is that potential donors often do not provide equipment, that can be easily repaired on site. In fact, in the past, we had a hard time convincing an Italian donor to buy the old French water pumps instead of the super modern German ones he was offering, but which the Tanekasi tribe, Tanekasi is a tribe of northern Benin, would never have been able to repair. Therefore, is necessary a general 20-year project that must always take into account local conditions, choosing for the first 5 years some pilot regions where to test the projects, then exporting them elsewhere, and above all, is necessary making use of qualified experts and a very good knowledge of the different realities, leaving to the economists only the administrative side. Of course, this will take years, but the first stone must be laid yet. Continuing to finance states to pay slave traders to keep migrants in concentration camps is immoral. It undermines the human rights of migrants, and in any case, it is not useful, as not only do the flow not cease, but the nation have ever the sword of Damocles hanging over their heads as the financial states, in order to obtain new amounts of money from Europe, threaten to open the way to Europe for more and more and more African waves of migrants. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Faldini. We're going to now move to another of my colleagues, Mr. Patrick Mulvihill, who is the Assistant Provost for Global Education and Experience at Augsburg University. Mulvihill brings over 30 years of experience in global and experiential education and leads these initiatives at Augsburg University. He holds a BA in History and a Master's in International Development from the University of Minnesota. Today, Mulvihill will share the pedagogy behind the study abroad programs and how they connect to the topic of today's International Day, Migration and Climate Change. Your title is The Human Impacts of Mass Migration, Lessons from Study Abroad. Welcome to the stage.
Thank you. Buongiorno, thank you for the time today. As Bettina said, my job at Augsburg University is to oversee our global education efforts, and chief among those is the Augsburg Center for Global Education and Experience, where most of those initiatives are housed. My talk today will attempt to show you how migration appears as a major theme in CGEE's. CGEE is the abbreviation, so we don't have to say Center for Global Education and Experience all the time, to show you how migration fits into the curricula of CGEE. I'm going to do something here. First, let me tell you a little more about what CGEE is. I think it's important for the framing. As I suggested, it's at the simplest level, CGEE is just our study abroad office, the place where Augsburg students can go to learn about their options for studying abroad during their time at college, and to enroll in those programs. But we're also much more than that. The field of study abroad in the United States is generally divided into two categories. On the one side, you have exchange programs. I think many of you know what those are. You know, we have agreements with universities all over the world, many in Norway. If a student wants to go to that university for a semester, they come to us, we sign them up, they fly to Norway, they fly to Austria, they fly to Germany, and they study for a semester. But our students can also choose to go on a program that Augsburg CGE itself runs, with our own courses and our own faculty employed by Augsburg. And those programs that we run have a few distinctive elements. First of all, they're all experiential. Quite simply, it means we encourage students to learn by doing. They get into the field with rich opportunities for field work. Second, we try our best to make sure that field work is community driven. Pretty logical. We think that Our community partners are experts in their communities, not us. They know what's best for themselves. We attempt to follow their priorities, not our own. Third, our programs all focus, broadly speaking, under the label of social justice, focus on social change movements in the host country. And the idea is that students will learn about social change movements in that country and perhaps come back with ideas or inspirations for change in the United States to make the United States a more just society. And though it's not shown on the slide, there's one last distinction. Our programs are open to students from all universities, not just Augsburg students. So in a typical year, we will serve 700 students, and they come from universities all over the United States. A little bit about where CGE is. We run our own programs in 12 countries, or soon to be 12 countries. Please note the concentration in Latin America. I'll draw mostly on that for my talk because it relates most directly to migration. Also note, for the Italians in the crowd, shout out, we have a location in Tuscany where our students study at a sustainable farm. And then finally, note that we are developing a program in Norway to be launched in fall 2025. Focused on Norway's social welfare model. So we're trying to expand what we do to some new places. And a final word about pedagogy. I know I've touched on that, but I think these final points are especially relevant to migration. CGE has liberal values. We own that. We're a liberal entity. We're an internationalist entity. That's our lens. That's our perspective. We don't hide that. But it means we have to try to be especially careful when we're presenting our students with arguments that are not liberal and not internationalist, when we're exposing them to the other side. In our pedagogy, we try very hard to resist the straw man. I don't know if you have this expression in Italian or Norwegian. I'm sure you have something like it. A man made of straw is an argument in English that you've made intentionally silly or weak in order to make it easy to defeat. We don't want to do that. We want students to understand the other side from the strongest possible perspective, the steel man, a man made of steel. And so this means reading books, reading articles by people who make the other arguments. It sometimes means inviting them in. If we have a program on the excesses of multinational corporations, we might invite someone from one of those corporations to come and speak to our students to get the point of view from the person's mouth. This approach accomplishes three things. I mean, some of you are teachers, these won't surprise you. Students might actually learn something that they didn't know. It makes their own arguments stronger so that when they leave college, they can defend what they believe. It also demonstrates to them that when there are serious issues like migration, there really aren't very often simple solutions. There are always trade-offs. So mass migration is perfect as a topic for this pedagogical approach because it entails pretty serious trade-offs. As Marianne, when we were at your home yesterday, you suggested some of these trade-offs when you said that a truly just world would be one in which danger didn't compel people to leave their homes in the first place. It was very close to that. It made an impression. I wrote it down. So when we discuss these trade-offs with students, we really want to try to put it in a frame, make it clear. We tend to talk about the sending country, or sending community, and the receiving country, in our case, the United States, and we talk about the benefits and the challenges of each. So let's first talk about the sending country benefits that we try to expose our students to. One of CGE's most important locations is in a place called Cuernavaca in Mexico, in the Mexican state of Morelos. Last year, over 2.5 million people crossed the U.S.-Mexican border. Most of them crossed without documents, illegally. About half of them were Mexicans themselves, and a disproportionate number of those were from Morelos State, where our students study. Minneapolis, by the way, is one of their top destinations. Most of these photos here are from Minneapolis. Now, economic forces are the main thing driving them, but when our students conduct field interviews with the local people in Morelos, they don't usually start there when they talk about the benefits. Instead, they usually start with the non-economic benefits. For one, migration often is a revelation to them that they're not alone or isolated the way they feel they are. Morelos is home to a significant number of indigenous rights organizations, and they experience great repression from the Mexican government. So when their sons and daughters come to the United States, places like Minneapolis, they find themselves living adjacent to other indigenous communities from other countries and from indigenous communities from Minneapolis. And they find that they have many of the same issues. They have common cause. They're not alone. They can cooperate and learn from each other. In addition, a lot of these immigrants find that they are freer to practice their traditional customs where they've come in Minneapolis than they are at home. Because in Minneapolis, they're not seen as political acts. They're just customs. This is a kind of freedom. Interview respondents also tell our students the joy they feel for their children's entrepreneurial success. You see some of the businesses here. Morelos, where our students study, has a disproportionately high number of high school and university graduates. The indigenous people there are traditionally very entrepreneurial. They're artisans, they're business owners, but they have very few opportunities for that there. They see their children come to Minneapolis where they have great opportunities, and it makes them happy. Then we turn to the broader question of these economic benefits. For our students, they don't often, I know for most of the people in the room, you know about remittances, but our students are 20 years old. This is a revelation to them when we talk about the benefits to the sending country of remittances. Remittances, of course, are the payments that people make back home to their families after they've immigrated, usually to a wealthier place. In 2023, the World Bank estimates that remittances to low and medium income countries will be $626 billion. Mexico is the second largest recipient of those remittances, surpassed only by a little bit by India. That number's huge. Let's put it in perspective. It's substantially larger than the GDP of Norway. In some countries where CG works, I think of Guatemala, it's a fifth of the total economy. These economies are utterly dependent on this money. And remittances, as the chart shows, have a lot of advantages. First of all, you see they're pretty stable or growing. There's no dip during the 2008 financial crisis as there is with foreign direct investment. That's that top one. There's no dip during COVID as there is with those portfolio equity flows coming in and out of people's retirement accounts. It just, like the turtle, just doot, 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 doot. So it's stable. It also goes directly to the people who benefit from it. So there's not a lot of waste. That line where you see ODA, that's foreign aid that countries like Norway give. But by some estimates, 50% of that foreign aid is lost to the bureaucracies who administer it, to corruption, to waste. With remittances, almost all of it goes into grandma's pocket. So big benefits, but there are also real challenges. First of all, there's the fracturing of families. In many CG countries, it's shocking. 25% of the children under 18 in El Salvador and Cuba, where we work, a quarter of children have a primary caregiver, a mother or father or other primary caregiver living abroad. This has serious deleterious effects on children's mental health. One UCLA study has found, a recent study in Mexico, that compared to children in homes where there is no primary caregiver gone to migration, those children are 3 times more likely to suffer from chronic physical illness, 2.5 times more likely to suffer from emotional problems like depression and self-harm, 2 times more likely to suffer from behavioral problems like skipping school, truancy, and petty crime. There is also the loss of human capital. We hear a lot about the brain drain. Some of that is probably not supported by the data. People like Elon Musk probably wouldn't have started that company in South Africa. The data doesn't really show that's a serious issue, what we call brain drain. But at one level below the Elon Musks of the world, there are problems. So countries like El Salvador and Guatemala have lost millions of their young people. People at prime working age who've left those countries who would have provided, if I can be honest, cheap labor. The World Bank has studied this outflow and has looked at El Salvador and Guatemala where we work, And they've found that over the last 30 years, those countries have lost 1.5% of their GDP a year because they've lost those workers. And that doesn't sound like a lot, but over 30 years, you know how compounding works in your bank account. Over 30 years, that means El Salvador is 50% poorer than it would have been if it had been able to keep those people. So these are serious problems, and we want our students to talk about it honestly. So then there's the receiving country. Next slide, please. Thank you. In our case, the United States is the receiving country. So yeah, big benefits, right? I mean, we all know about these in Europe too. Italy especially, you have the same demographic challenges we have. The problem of demographic decline is well known. The United States, for most of my life, was an exception to this. We had high birth rates among the native population. This is no longer true. The Brookings Institution released a report just this week which showed that, this is a hypothetical, but if the United States allowed no more immigrants into its country, that by 2100, the year 2100, 77 years from now, we would have 100 million fewer people. By contrast, at the current rate of migration, we will have 60 million more people by the year 2100. These are people supporting our Social Security, paying taxes, sending kids to our schools. We ask our students to take it from the top macro level sometimes and look at the micro level. So when we do that, we have them look at one town in particular in western Minnesota, southwestern Minnesota, called Worthington. It's kind of the quintessential prairie town. Mostly Germans and Norwegians populated this place, farming town. By the, I'm not seeing the slide here on this screen, but I'll turn around. And I'm seeing Donald Trump behind me, so that's kind of, I don't know what's happening with the slides, but we might need to go back several. Sorry. We're a few slides ahead. That one, yeah. Maybe I'll just, are you the one doing, I'll say next slide. Okay. Thank you. So Worthington, Minnesota, small town. I can cut to the chase if you know that expression, make it quick. In the 1990s, this town was dying. Very young people, very old people, mostly very old, empty schools, empty streets. Not unusual, you see that in some Italian villages, right? In the last 30 years, thanks to an influx of Mexican immigrants, this town has grown by 35%. The schools are full, the streets are busy, and it's young. It's young. The average age in Worthington is 29, which is unheard of in the Western world. In the United States, the average age is 39. I think in Italy, it's 44, 45. So it's a great success. It's saved this town. There's also same slide. The increase in net wealth. We all know this very well, I think, that immigrants bring great net wealth to a new country. In the United States, it's about $1 trillion. Now, the argument some nativists will make is, couple back. Thank you, right there. The argument that some nativists will make is, well, that's $1 trillion, but that's helping the immigrants. That's not helping the people who already lived here. And there's some truth in that. But the Federal Reserve, that's our central bank, has studied this, and they said, no, well, still $100 billion of that money is still benefiting the native population. For a family like mine, that would mean that on average we're $500, $600 richer every year, thanks to immigrants. That's real. But the next question, and one of my last slides, gets now into the matter of how those gains are shared, because they're not shared very equally. Next slide, please. Thank you. So we've talked about how our students learn that, immigrants to the United States create wealth. But that wealth is not always evenly distributed. The average high school dropout in the United States makes only $30,000 a year. It's not much money. And a recent Harvard study cited in the slide found that the earnings of this highly vulnerable group decrease by almost $2,000 a year due to the downward pressure on wages from the influx of immigrants. Moreover, as the study notes, someone else's lower wages is almost always someone else's higher profit. And in this case, it's the employer. So you have those who are competing with immigrants at the very lowest level of the economy, who are losing money, and those who hire those immigrants, the employers, making money. And to some in that group, it feels like a redistribution scheme. You can see from the slide where I'm going with this. This, as whether we think it's good or not, I personally think it's not good at all. It feeds the rhetoric of demagogues who I'm sure Tor Heyerdahl would have opposed, who the CGE opposes. But we ask our students to take these things seriously, because there's a reason that this is not just an American problem. You can see the guy I got up there at the first. You see the other people I have up there. This is a European problem. This is increasingly a global problem. It's not just a Western problem. And the second thing we ask students to look at is studies on social cohesion, sometimes more commonly framed as social trust. So there are a lot of studies on this. I think it's pretty fashionable. Maybe there's a lot of money for these studies. But thankfully, someone decided to put all the studies together. The University of Copenhagen, a gentleman, put all these studies together into a meta-review in 2019 and found pretty clearly that across those 20 countries, 87 studies, that migration has a statistically significant reduction, causes a statistically significant reduction in social trust across almost all key measures. Willingness to engage with one's neighbors, willingness to engage in civil society, willingness to engage in political institutions. But, I'm kind of linking this back to Paul's talk, the study found something else. It found that communities that prioritize what it describes as deep, and the study goes into this in some detail, deep cultural integration. Those communities that do that, the harm to social trust disappears. So this would mean integration in the economy, integration in communities, trying to get people to live in integrated communities after the first generation, integration in common endeavors, this really emphasized, schools, universities, public institutions, it even cites military service, somehow bringing people together for a common endeavor. So last slide, please. So how do we wrap all this up and try to impart some useful lessons to our students? Well, one, you can probably hear from my talk, is that we try to have students come away understanding, okay, there are no easy solutions to complex problems. I should probably understand what people who disagree with me think. But most important, we try to teach students that they can be active when they get home and engaging with their neighbors in their community, and if they have political aspirations, maybe even in their nation or their state. This sounds easy and maybe like a cliche. Get engaged sounds like a cliche. It can be tough when we put it in the context of what I said in the last slide. So on the political right, when we ask people of good faith on the political right to actively seek out diversity. On the political left, we ask something else, maybe to question the trend toward private spaces as a form of empowerment for ethnic groups. We know that that is popular and it has its place. People need to feel safe. But is it always the right approach? Does it always work? Can it cause more harm than good? These aren't easy questions, and we ask our students to ask them. So as I finish, in that spirit, I want to read a quote by your father, if that's okay. It's in that, it kind of serves that idea of the common endeavor. And so this is Tor Heyerdahl in July 1969. He's sending a radio message to President Nixon, of all people, from the middle of the Atlantic on the boat the Ra. I've abridged it here, so it's shorter. But he writes, Mr. President, it is our desire to experiment in small scale with international cooperation under difficult and stressed conditions, and to test the unity of mankind in both time and space. Our expedition has the privilege to sail under the flag of the United Nations, together with the flags of the nations of everyone represented on board, 7 men from 7 countries. Having found in our little world of floating papyrus bundles that cooperation of men of different nations, races, linguistic habits, religions, political backgrounds, that cooperation can still be readily accomplished to the common cause. So I take this opportunity to take the liberty to extend to you my sincere wish that the captains of vessels bigger than my own, vessels like the great nations of the world, large and small, still have success in every effort toward that same friendship and cooperation in themselves. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pat. So we have one more before we have a break. One of the things I just want to reiterate in terms of Patrick's presentation to us is the importance of obviously learning from other cultures. And one of the things we're doing here today is I am in not a country of my own, and I'm also thinking about how we are talking and speaking in another language, and thanking everybody for both daring to speak another language and then for others also to trying to understand deep concepts in a language that is not your own. I've lived in the United States for about 25 years and I still don't feel quite like Bettina in Norway. And I think that tells a little bit about language too. But obviously the process of studying abroad and learning from others. We're now going to move to Dr. Katrin Papst, who is a researcher, speaker, and project leader and has a PhD in professional ethics. You've been with us before, Dr. Papst. We've heard today a lot about sort of percentages, more theories, and what we're going to move into now is personal stories. The project that you have led, Identity on the Line, has received many different awards. It was the European Museum Academy Prize winner in 2022, and in 2023 they won the Heritage Audiovisual Special Commendation Award. It is a 45-minute documentary. What is really the impact of traumatic experiences for one person, for generations, and how do we ensure healing? We talked a little bit yesterday about all the unrest that we are facing in the world today with the war between Hamas and Israel, the war in Ukraine, and thinking especially about all the work that you have studied and the healing that needs to take place with traumatic experiences and how it lives in generations. It's kind of a devastating thought right now, but we do have to be hopeful. So Katrin, your title is Personal Experiences of Migrants in Light of Climate Change and Sustainability. Welcome to the stage.
Thank you very much. First, thank you very much for the invitation to be here. It's an honor, this beautiful place, and by the organizers of this conference, so thank you. Also, thank you very much to all the lecturers before me. It was very impressive lectures. And poor you, who have to be here like 25 minutes more before you get a break. So I can only hope, and I would love to say I can only hope that I get your spirit up with my talk, but I'm not sure. Because I'm going to start quite a little bit depressing, to say it like that. At least I'm getting so depressed that yesterday evening I was so extremely depressed that I needed, where are the lights at the moment in the situation we are? So let me give you some impressions of the work we have done over the course of the last 4 years. And I want to start by just introducing you to the findings of the project, which Bettine, thank you for the introduction, referred to. It was a project called Identity on the Line, and 7 European countries have worked together. Museums and universities from 7 European countries have worked together, and we wanted to look at forced migration and war, and we knew, all of us know, it doesn't stop with the migrants themselves when they have settled. What happens with the trauma they are carrying with them? How does it affect the individuals, the generations, the families, the societies? And actually what we did, please, thank you. This is a challenge. I think we have to do it one by one, but then this is not working. So I'm sorry, we just have to improvise a little bit more. So I just want to give you a short overview of the countries involved. In Norway, where I come from, I'm actually a German, but living in Norway, I'm a Norwegian and a German, by the way, now since a few weeks. But basically in Norway, we were looking at the long-term consequences of the Second World War, when 500,000 Germans have occupied the country for 5 years. And until now, the Norwegians who have supported the Germans then are somehow outsiders in the society and feel, the third generation still feels the shame their grandparents felt. We are working with Denmark, who was working with Greenlandic people who came to Denmark because they needed work, they needed a better life. We have worked with Sweden. The Sami population is a minority. These are people who need the land for their reindeer herds, and they have been forced due to political decisions to leave their home and their countries. We have worked with Lithuania and the Holocaust, long-term consequences of the Holocaust. We have worked with Poland, also the Second World War, and most important here maybe, Slovenia and Croatia. And Croatia was working on a project with Italian people who were living in Croatia before it became Croatia, and then had to leave the country when the borders changed. So suddenly we had a different country. So Italians were not longer in Italy, they were suddenly finding themselves in Yugoslavia. And some decided to leave, some decided to stay, and that left all of them, both them who stayed and them who left, in really critical conditions. So I will just try, yes, thank you. In sum, we have interviewed in all the 7 countries 164 informants from all 3 generations. And each interview lasted between 2 and 15 hours. We have collected photographs, we have collected objects, we have collected stories. And what we found, and I'm just waiting a little bit until it comes back, what we found were some traits which were in all 3 generations, no matter which country you are coming from, no matter which migration process we are talking about. It is about the human experience of migration, and not only the loss you somehow have to work with and work through. It's how you are receiving, or how you have been received in the country you come to. You have very much talked about this in a very interesting matter. And in the end, it's also a very personal process to find out who are you in the new setting. And we found that all 3 generations have different approaches. These are the people who were migrants themselves. In very many cases, if we talk about forced migration, sudden migration, war, you had to leave your country. Maybe you lost something which was really important for you. This left this generation with traumas which were so massive that they were not able to talk about this. And they thought, okay, let's say we are migrants, we come to a new country, we don't tell our kids the tough stuff, we will just try to build up a new life, and then our children might have it better. Sorry, it doesn't work like this, because the second generation always senses and feels that something is going on in their parents which they were not able to process properly, and it disturbs massively the relation between the first and the second generation. And this is really an important point. The third generation is still the same, which when the second generation doesn't dare to confront the first generation, what happened when you were a migrant? What did you experience? How did it feel to leave your home country? How did it feel to come to a country where you're not welcome? Then it does something with this generation who doesn't dare to ask, and then it still affects the third generation. Could you please take the next? I'm not sure if it will work. I would like now to come to, just before you start, to give you a little input about how it was for the Italians, where some Italians chose to leave what former was Italy and then suddenly was Yugoslavia, while some still were there. And now you have a beautiful presentation. You can see everything I wanted to show you afterwards. I still promise to stop before the break, but maybe we can try to get the movie now. We try again.
In the 20th century alone, most of the peninsula of Istria was governed by 4 different states: the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the Kingdom of Italy, the Socialist Federal Republic of Yugoslavia, and, as of 1991, the Republic of Croatia. During World War II, it was part of Italy. With the capitulation of Italy and the fall of fascism in 1943, Istria, a borderland and a region of high ethnic diversity, once again became a subject of negotiations. The Paris Peace Treaties of 1947 handed the peninsula to Yugoslavia. For a short period, though, it was also divided into Zone A, which was controlled by the Allies, and Zone B, which was part of the Socialist Federal Republic of Yugoslavia. That came to an end when Italy, the United Kingdom, the United States of America, and Yugoslavia signed a Memorandum of Understanding in London in 1954. The attitude of the newly established political authorities towards the indigenous Italians in Istria was one of strong suspicion. This hostility was driven by ideology and nationalism. Treated as foreigners in their own country, itself now Slavic, they were often seen as leftovers of the previous, brief Italian rule in Istria, which had lasted from 1920 to 1943 and had become the fascist regime in its later phase. Indeed, many of the Italian Istrians were considered to be fascists. Unlike the extensive Slavic population, they were often members of the upper class, and as such, they were dismissed, considered to be part of the bourgeoisie, the class that the new, communist-oriented authorities were trying to disempower. The threats, humiliations, and even assassinations occasionally inflicted on the Italians in the immediate post-war period frightened their community. Their social, religious, and cultural life was changing immensely, just as it was for everyone in Istria. As a result, many of the inhabitants, not only those who identified as Italian, but also numerous Istrians of Slavic origin, were forced to leave in search of a better life. Their destinations were mainly Italy, the USA, and Australia. Many of the people who opted to emigrate to Italy spent years in refugee camps throughout that country, waiting for job opportunities. Adapting to their new social and cultural realities was difficult because they were often regarded as second-class Italians or even fascists, thanks to their decision to leave communist Yugoslavia. The exodus of over 200,000 people left Istria partly depopulated and bereft of the cultural traditions of the semi-urban and urban populations. A percentage of Italian Istrians did remain, though. Their life wasn't easy either, since they were objects of suspicion not only to the new authorities, but also to the Italian Istrians who'd left.
Okay, you saw, I don't know how much you heard, but this was just an example that if politicians, a typical example for politics do something which affects people so directly that they have to leave their land. And here you see the first quote, very much for several reasons, and like much is of course not that I think this is a nice quote, but this is, and I have to say, all our informants, all 164 informants have never shared their stories before, okay? Because all stories which they told us were so personal and so nobody had ever asked them about this, and they didn't feel they had the right to talk about it. And sometimes it was shameful, sometimes most of the time it was too painful. And this guy also, this man, had never
our informants, you can read while I'm talking, I'm sure you're good at multitasking. So all our informants, and I have no quotes now from the Holocaust and no quotes from the war, which you can imagine are also heartbreaking. But the people, all people remember how they are treated when they needed it most. And when it was too painful that you can't share it, it does something with your kids and grandchildren. The next one. Here from Sweden, and also an example which comes surely back soon. Also, you can read it when it comes up again. That also the third generation, still, even if they have never lived at the place which their parents came to leave suddenly, they feel a connection, they try to find out how did this shape me as well, and they try to find answers without getting answers from their parents and grandparents. And the last one, please. This is from Denmark. I think when it comes back, and also a quote from someone who is only 38, she was, but we talked to 30-year-old people who said, I still don't know who I am. I still don't know where I belong. And the feeling in the society that I'm still not accepted, I work born here just because my grandparents came from another place, is really tough. To sum this up, maybe we can then take the next one, please. To sum this up, first before you look at that, I just wanted to say three things which I was thinking about when hearing to the other lectures. All our informants talked about this personal big loss, the mourning process you go through if you have to leave your land, if you have to leave your country, if you have to leave your home. This is one of the worst experiences you can have, okay? So this is very important. And then, as I said, how are you received by the country or by the society you come from? I was just summing up, or we talked in our group quite often about that. Of course, every human being has a need to fulfill their needs. This is basic, of course, you all need it. Some travel, some are migrants to come to a place where they can improve these basic needs in some way or another. So you're looking for a better fulfillment. But then you have are you a refugee? And we are talking about climate migrants, but I would also in many cases call them climate refugees, and this has a big impact. Maybe we could have the next picture. Okay, and here again, for my technical dream this morning until 10 minutes ago was that I can take one picture, and explain what I meant with this. Basically, these are all pictures showing how your home country, which for most people is one of the most important aspects of their identity, is in many countries, as we heard from you today, not longer possible to live there, okay? If I would now in the break, which soon starts, take all of you and ask you, what defines your identity? What is most important for you? You would tell me most probably different things. You would say, my family most important. It's most important to live in the culture where I grew up. It's most important to have a surrounding where I feel at home. But many of you would say to me, I love where I live. I love the mountains. I love the sea. I love the woods. I love the nature. This is my place. These are not only my people, this is also my place. Here do I belong. Also to nature and to the people. What happens if you no longer are able to live where you want to live? One thing is that you can see something is happening. We have to do something. I decide, it's very painful, but I decide I'm going to go to another place, try to find some work somewhere else, because I see that my land is changing. Maybe I'm a fisherman, maybe I need the fish, maybe I'm a man working in the woods, maybe the animals have no longer the food. So you decide, because of climate changes, which will also only increase, as we all know, you decide to travel abroad. This is one thing. The other scenario is,
and that I will come back to in a second, that you have to leave, and you have to leave immediately. And I think that we also will go to see more and more in the future. This is just a quote from the brochure, which all of you have and should read. I think I go on to the next, please. I would like to have some reflections, I had some reflections about this, and again, the technology is not working as I wanted. I wanted to take it one by one, each sentence, and reflect in detail. But if we start with the first one, I was thinking a little bit about, I'm not thinking a bit about it, but at the moment, what is happening in Palestine and Israel is, of course, breathtaking in any negative way you can think about. And the hate which is building up between nations and between people will last for most probably many more than 3 generations. What now if there are climate changes that force you to leave what is most important to you, take people from you through a fire, that they don't have the food, they don't have the drink? What if the the population of the world, we are all responsible, the Western countries much more than the other countries, of course, but what if there is no one to blame for the migration you have to do? There are no politicians, there are no people to blame, we are all to blame. This is quite interesting because we are, of course, not going to take the responsibility, all of us. Those of us who are lucky enough living in the countries where this is not so crucial with the climate changes, we will, of course, not take all the other people who have to run from their countries into the warmth or colds of our countries. Okay, this begins to be a little bit, could you please go back? This is very important. I know you can't do anything with that. This sentence, maybe you can read it very fast and you remember it, and just in case it disappears again. The trauma aspect is really, really, really important, and that goes for climate, migrants or refugees, as for anyone else. If you experience a sudden loss, it can be a sudden loss of your home, it can be a sudden loss of your family, of the people you love. If you experience anything like this, and you don't get help, and you are not able to talk about it, it will affect your life, it will affect your health, it will affect your family relations, it will affect your kids, and it will affect your grandchildren, and it affects the societies. I could say very much more about that, but it is crucial to know how important it is that those who have to leave their countries, war, trauma, everything which might be involved, or the fires, whatever it is, they need help to somehow talk about what has happened. At least the possibility. The long-term consequences of those who choose to migrate, and I'm not talking about working migration where you come to a country which is so similar to yours that you just can go right into it, like when I came as a German to Norway. But they will always be there, and it is always crucial how we receive, how we approach the people who are coming to the new communities. Several steps can be taken to successfully integrate migrants. Of course, we all know that, and there were nice, very important examples from your countries. Maybe the next one, please. I was trying, I'm not sure if you see my red line here, because I'm a little bit distracted by the technology, who is a little bit off and on. But I wanted to just reflect before I end on how this is also related to the sustainability development goals. And if you could please take the next slides. As you all know, there are 17 of them. I personally find 4 extremely important. And I just want to end with the last one, so now you can press several times. Thank you very much. Because I think it sums up all the lectures we have heard so far today, at least a little bit, because if we want to somehow fight that what the migrants or the refugees experience today, if it's due war, if it's due forced migration, if it's because of climate change and forced migration in the future related to that, if we want to fight it, we have to stand together. We have to do everything at the same time. We have to take the education, we have to think about the economics, we have to think about how in the Vestfold-Fylke, for example, in Norway, how the museums can work together with the county. The same in Italy, how Norway and Italy can work together, how Norway, Italy and the USA can work together. How can we on a global scale, how can we on a local scale somehow work together to really integrate migrants in the best possible way and address their personal stories, what they take with them when they come to our countries, to our places. How can we help to process it, that these experiences are not going on to the next generation? I'm sorry for the technical stuff, and now I think it's time for a break, but I leave that to you, Betty.
Thank you so much. You can see that someone is really engaged in their work, and it's wonderful to see that. Thank you again, Katrin Paps, for all of your work. A couple of things that you said today too, and we remember talking with Marianne and Bettina yesterday about this too, with their father's sort of vision of, and also statement of saying that nobody necessarily wants to leave their place. Had we been maybe aware of this and worked on these issues earlier, the best help would have been to provide the help in the countries where people live so they didn't have to leave. So maybe we can get back to that place at some point. But you also addressed the cooperation that is just so important, that we all work together, and I think that is going to be just sort of the key words, obviously, for today's session. We are going to have a little break, and I think we're going to come back at 2:15, if I'm not mistaken. And so, yes, time to connect and talk and maybe do some networking. Thank you so much.